May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words that you hear be captured by your soul, enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. Earlier this week in the office, when I mentioned to Margaret that my reflection today would be celebrating chaos, she smiled and said, "Jim, chaos coming from you?" You see, I sometimes, maybe all the time, appear to be the poster boy for order. My office is organized and tidy. My house is nearly always immaculate. My lists are endless, and I am continuously planning ahead. The worship team meeting this past week received outlines for Advent, Christmas, and Epiphany. So I confess that I do like order, that there is a level of comfort for me in that kind of order. But it is not in any way how I ultimately understand how life unfolds, the way of the world, or the presence of God in all of it. The reality is that it is impossible, absolutely impossible, to bring complete order to our lives and certainly to our world. It will always be messy and uncertain. The universe, including us, is on an evolutionary journey. Nothing is fixed and nothing stays the same. Life happens, sometimes expectedly and orderly, and other times unexpectedly and chaotically. What I have learned in the last decade or so is that both chaos and order is the way of life, the way of all life. And I need to accept the simple truth that nothing is certain. So much so that Peter Short, former moderator of the United Church, said to a group of us gathered one time, "Certainty, my friends, is madness." The biblical passage we heard today is a story of our unwillingness to accept uncertainty, a story of our need for order, and in particular, our need for the kind of God that ensures the order we want. The journey of the Hebrew people out of Egypt in search of the promised land was a journey of unending chaos and uncertainty. They wandered year after year after year, not knowing where they might end up, where the next meal would come from, or whether they'd even have water to drink. Moses found himself needing somehow to guarantee certainty in order to subdue the fear of the people. They needed to know that everything would turn out okay. Unfortunately, most religious doctrine has been an attempt to provide guarantees that everything will turn out okay, rather than helping people to cope with the fact that life doesn't always turn out well. Moses couldn't promise that all would be well, but he trusted. He trusted in the kind of God presence that would be with them no matter what the circumstances. But this wasn't a presence that would rescue them in difficult times or save them from death. Rather, it was trust in an abiding and indwelling presence that was there in the chaos and in the order in life day to day. Moses was able to rally the people most of the time, but they were unable, it seems, to understand God in this way themselves. So when Moses is delayed, when he's gone away to commune with God, they panic. They panic. They want order, and they want a God to protect them, to save them, and to rescue them. Their fear of uncertainty and their overwhelming need for security causes them to create a God in the form of a golden calf. A God to go ahead of them, as the story says. A God to praise when things went well, and a God to blame when things go badly. They believed they were incapable of accepting reality. They believed there was a God out there in control, setting the world in order, and that if they believed hard enough and if they prayed long enough, this God would protect them from the chaos of the world. The problem is, when we choose to believe there is a God that is in control, you also then have to believe that this same God either brings harm to you or others, or allows bad things to happen to you or others. This kind of God is a very human-made and tiny God. It is the God of our traditional Lord's Prayer, from whom we have to ask for daily bread and beg forgiveness, a God that might rescue us from the bad things or not. It is a golden calf kind of God. When Moses returns, he is deeply, deeply disappointed that the people have abandoned a more infinite and indwelling sense of God for a very tiny, judgmental, and narcissistic kind of God. And his response is to leave the camp, to walk away and stand at the gate and say, Who is on God's side? Come with me. He is saying, who is willing to trust that there is a loving presence within the chaos and order of life, within the good times and the not so good times, within every joy and within every sorrow? He is saying, who is willing to accept an understanding of a God that is not in control, but is rather the heart of all of life in the entire universe, the way of love that is life's glue. This God is a love that is present in everything all the time and demands not our obedience, but our trust. It seems to me that this is what it means to be truly faithful, to trust the infinite source of love. Dr. James Finley, an author, mystic, and former monk who studied with Thomas Merton, who some of you may know that name, says, all of life, distilled to its simple essence, has to do with the intimate, utterly personal way that each of us serendipitously stumbles upon this great truth. When everything is said and done, only love is real. Only love endures. Outside of love, there is nothing. Nothing at all. He says, we subsist in varying degrees of awareness from which flows gratitude and peace. He wrote that a few days ago. John the Cross, in the 16th century, a Spanish mystic and friar, believed that substantial union with God, substantial union with love, is our God-given godly nature, the inherent sacredness of life itself. And he says, our growing awareness of effective union is the way of beginners. We begin with a finite idea about God, which reveals something of the nature of the infinite. This is the ego illumined by faith. This is the beginning of our spiritual journey. We rightly learn at this stage how to live by this love that we are experiencing. But he continues and says, to stay in this beginning stage, which is where most religions try to keep us, with a finite notion of God, will not bring us into union with God, will not bring us into union with infinite love. We need to keep our spiritual journey moving. We need to fully encounter the presence of God, the presence of great love in all of the order and all of the horrible chaos of our lives and our world. And we need to rid ourselves of the notion of God that needs to be thanked for good things and blamed or feared for the not so good things. We need to open and embrace an infinite loving presence that is the heart of every single moment in all of life. This, for me, is about coming home. Coming home. Our crayons in the story this morning each find themselves in the chaos and uncertainty of life. They wanted to be rescued and protected from the reality they find themselves in, to be restored to perfect crayons in a perfect box. But Duncan doesn't rescue, protect, or restore. Instead, he provides a home. He provides a home where they find love, they find acceptance, they find comfort, and they find support, regardless of what life has been or continues to be for them. Mary Oliver says this beautifully, I think, in this poem of hers called A Thousand Mornings. And she says, all night my heart makes its way, however it can, over the rough ground of uncertainties. But only until night meets and then is overwhelmed by morning, the light deepening, the wind easing and just waiting, as I too wait. And when have I ever been disappointed for Redbird to sing? So for myself, I can create a little order. And in the whole scheme of things, it's a very little bit of order. And I can accept that chaos and order is the way of life, that nothing is certain, that God is not in control, except that love, fluid, pervasive, and eternal, is our refuge and our strength. It is this love in itself that brings order by the way we choose to respond to the events of our lives, and ultimately emboldens the heart within us, within each of us, to acknowledge and then celebrate chaos. Amen.